Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Welcome, engagers. Once again, we are on Professor Game Podcast, and we have Stephen with us today. But Stephen, before we get started, are you prepared to engage?
I sure am.
We are today with Stephen, who is the founder of Inc. Best Workplaces Company, monthly contributor to Forbes.com, and regular speaker at EdTech conferences. He creates games to educate and activate audiences. And since launching the game agency 13 years ago and the training arcade 4 years ago, he has developed award-winning games for new employee onboarding, sales and product training, leadership development, safety, security, compliance, systems and processes, customer services, and many other training topics. And he has also helped shape the education industry and disrupt traditional learning methods with the creation of interactive games such as S.T.E.M, financial literacy, and social skills, which have been deployed in thousands of schools. So that sounds like fantastic stuff that we can talk about today. Stephen, is there anything that we're missing that you want to talk about before we kick off?
No, I'm looking forward to it. There's a lot to dig into.
So let's do that, Stephen. And we want to get to know our guests very, very quickly. And we want to know, what does a day in the life of Stephen, what does being you in a day like today look like? What are the things that you do in these days?
Well, I have an active game at home, which is called Take Care of My 3 Kids. But outside of that, I run a small company. The game agency is about 50 people strong. And really, we're focused on 2 things, building a lot of custom games. And it could be across any of those topics that you just listed off. But also, we launched a few years ago a product called the Training Arcade that allows people to create their own games. And as is indicative with the name, it's really focused on making training and education a lot more interactive, a lot more effective, and a lot more fun. And so, the reality is that regardless of whether we're building something custom or using our tool to allow people to build their own things, we're very content agnostic and really just focused on how can you use games, game theory, gamification to make learning a much more effective experience.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. And Stephen, now that we know you a bit more, we've seen, what do you do very, very quickly. Can you tell us, we always, sort of come in strong in that sense. We want to know of a time that you might even call your favorite fail or first attempt in learning. One of those times when you were going north and things went south, things didn't go your way. Especially we want to be there in that story with you and learn some lessons so that we don't commit the same mistakes.
So I have had a lot of failures in my life. So that's a hard question because it's trying to pick the one that makes the most sense to talk about. But the one that I probably look back on over and over again and am glad that I experienced is product related. So as an entrepreneur, I've always wanted to create a product that could be sticky, that could be scalable, that could be exciting and effective. And certainly using games and gamification as the core has been my focus. And over the years, I've built out a few different products. But, the interesting thing is that when I initially started, and I should mention that our company today runs 2 products. It runs the Training Arcade, which I mentioned earlier, but it also runs a product called Motivate Cloud. And Motivate Cloud is a gamified learning management system. So in short, users get points for everything they do. They take courses, they participate in a social feed, they do different activities, and all those points really lead up to tangible rewards. And I thought this was the most innovative idea possible. But the reality is that when I launched this back in 2012, I really neglected to look at the marketplace and understand the fact that there were 1,000 other learning management systems out there and that I'd be competing with every single one of them, especially the big guys who had marketing budgets in the 7-figure marks, right? So what I realized as a result, and luckily we've been able to build a nice product and sustain it and grow it, but the mistake that I made and something that really helped focus me into the next chapter of my career was thinking about how do you build products regardless of the industry or regardless of the focus, that make other products better, right? Because I went in there creating this learning management system that I'm very proud of, but competed with so many other things. So fast forward a few years later, I wanted to create my next product, which is the training arcade, which plugs into every learning management system, plugs into all online webinar platforms, plugs into lots of different third-party solutions and makes them better. And that was a really great lesson for me because I learned early on that if you're going to go and compete, the hill is way higher. But if you're going to build a product that can make other solutions better, the opportunities are so vast and there's lots of room for scalability that you wouldn't experience otherwise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're thinking of not reinventing the wheel in many ways, but rather improving the wheel. And that would be something, a pretty interesting lesson you took from that experience, knowing that there are other people out there as well doing interesting things, especially when there are big fish, as you were saying. So thank you for that story, Stephen. That's very, very interesting. And let's take a 180-degree spin. Let's go actually for a time in which you did something that you would now call a success, something that you want to be proud of and maybe have that proud moment with us here today. What would you say that story would be?
So there's lots of games we've built over time. And I think that, some of the ones that I'm most proud of, and I'm, coming out of the gamification world and going right into games, but a lot of the games that we've created in the education space certainly give me a lot of pride. We've built a lot of things that focus on, kindergarten through 12th grade here in the US, and focus on STEM education, focused on social skills, focused on financial literacy. One of the things that our company has been hyper-focused on is really tapping into the passion points of players. So it's not just important enough to build a compelling game, but really trying to think about how can you build a game that is going to be relatable and it's going to draw people in. So one of the things that we've focused on over the last several years is building out STEM education courses that tie to major intellectual properties like the National Hockey League here in the US and Canada, thinking about telling the story of STEM, angles, temperature, velocity, speed through the lens of a sport. You could play as any of the hockey teams. We worked with Major League Baseball here in the US to think about introducing key math and linguistic concepts to people. Possibly the one that really got me the most exciting is one that we focused on that is called the Compassion Project that we built in conjunction with with the underwriting of LinkedIn. And thinking about how do you work with kindergartners through second graders to think about those social skills and those interpersonal skills and relating to one another. And so we've really focused a lot on telling stories, using gameplay as an interactive driver, but really touching upon the passion points of the player, because when you do that, you're not only going to get them to play, but you're going to get them to play over and over and over again. And as a result, the information is going to be a lot more sticky and successful.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. In fact, sounds like the passion that drove you actually to this whole industry. And that is our main topic, definitely here on the podcast. So, Stephen, that sounds great. It seems you've had plenty of time, plenty of experience to find out things and new things and more things. So you probably have already, in this 13 years plus those 4 years of the training arcade, to figure out some sort of process. So let's say a client comes up today, or you want to create something for education, as you've been mentioning. How do you do it? What happens? Like, what's the process? Is there a process? How do you do these things?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing is trying to understand your audience altogether, and who is your audience? What do you anticipate they are going to be focused on? How are they potentially most effectively inspired and engaged? What's going to keep them coming back over and over again? And tapping into not just the passion points that we discussed, but also just the drivers that would really make them want to participate. Obviously, there's so many things, whether it's about accomplishment or meaning, empowerment, social influence, really tapping into any of those things that you think are going to really drive them. And then I think thinking about, on top of that, what is the storyline that's going to really be most applicable? What's going to get them feeling like they're part of something bigger? And if they're part of something bigger, most likely they're going to stick with it and they're going to participate over and over again. Then it's thinking about both intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. what's actually going to drive them. And then when it comes down to actual game mechanics, thinking about what the content is, what the goal is, whether it's an educational goal, whether it's a marketing goal, what mechanics are actually going to be the most appropriate in getting someone to try out that new skill or that new performance or that new objective of any type. So we have kind of a robust spreadsheet that we look at as any new opportunity comes in, and looking across the board at all those and many more components to try to figure out what should the design be, what should the experience be, and what is the desired outcome.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. They sound like very, very reasonable steps, but maybe you can delve a little bit further. Like you're thinking of, oh yeah, how do I determine which are these game mechanics? What would you like? How do you decide? What does that actually look like? You're thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to add some game mechanics. Do I add A? Do I add B? Do I add leaderboards? Do I avoid leaderboards? How do you make these decisions?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is thinking about what is the desired outcome, right? Is the desired outcome that you want someone coming back over and over again? Is it that you want someone to change behavior? Is it that you want someone to be an expert at something? Is it just about building better community? Is it about getting people to compete with each other or collaborate with each other? And I think that those types of questions are ultimately going to determine what type of mechanics you're going to use. Specifically in the education space, we think often about what are we trying? What is the performance objective here? Or is it just about recall? Is it about someone being able to categorize or strategize, or to focus on process, or to focus on soft skills? And the really amazing thing about games is that there are dozens of fantastic game mechanics that are used in commercial worlds that are just as applicable in the marketing world or in a training world. But it's really tapping into understanding which objectives are there and then determining which ones to use. And the nice thing is that when talking to a client, one, you need to really do that due diligence and ask them those questions. But two, it's very easy to be able to point to lots of commercial games out there and say, well, this one is going to accomplish this. Now, here's the basic user experience. Obviously, we want it to be very custom to your brand or to your audience or to your topic. But I think that people can get their heads around that today because there's so many types of games out there. They're so available and very easy to draw those connections with the right conversations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That sounds great. It sounds fantastic. Some great tips from Stephen. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. Talking about these ideas, these recommendations, what would you say is there some sort of best practice? Again, it's not the golden game mechanic at all, but is there something that you think, when you're creating your projects, when you're creating something for education, thinking about this, using this will certainly help improve at least your project. Is there such a thing for you, a best practice?
Well, so there's a few things that we look at. So first of all, we look at specifically in the training and education space, do you want them ultimately to be able to apply this skill on the job or in life? What type of cost per learner are you looking for, right? What type of proficiency in the skill are you looking for? How about confidence? Is that critical? Is it are there particular pieces of information that need to be retained? And then the next thing is that how do you want them to apply the skill post training? Right? What level of engagement do you want? So we kind of ask all those things. And then we kind of skip over to something, if you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy,
yep.
Really focusing on remembering and understanding and applying and analyzing and evaluating and creating. And you kind of go through all those and figure out, okay, which ones of these are the most important? And as a result, what type of game mechanic is going to lend itself most effectively to really honing in and improving those skills? And the nice thing is that each one of them has, a handful that you can really leverage.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Great recommendations once again. And we would like to know, continuing in that recommendations, after hearing these questions, after, listening to a few episodes of Professor Game, is there any person that comes to your mind and say, oh, I'd really like to listen this or that person answering these questions as a new guest in Professor Game?
It's a good question. We've been doing a lot of work with some professors at some of the major business schools here in the U.S. One that we're working with right now, Linda Hill, who's a business professor at Harvard Business School, is utilizing games to really go through business simulations and thinking about that. And I quite honestly, regardless of the school or the professor, I think that that's a really interesting category to look at, because the reality is when it comes to those soft skills and those strategic skills, I think there's a lot of opportunities to apply games in a much more meaningful way in the corporate world than is being used today. So Linda is amazing, and someone I certainly would encourage you to speak with if you're not familiar with her already. But that's the first one that comes to mind off the top of my head.
Absolutely. It sounds like a very interesting guest and maybe somebody we will even reach out to. So, Stephen, when we're thinking of creating games, of using gamification in education, in learning especially, is there some book that you would say, oh, you should definitely look into this book and read it to get a very good reference? Is there a book that you would recommend the engagers?
So it's really more of an author. I've done a lot of work with, and I really admire the way he thinks, is Carl Kapp. And I know you've spoken with Carl in the past.
Yes.
Carl has done some really great pieces, both on books and certainly dozens and dozens of articles. And we've done some thinking together about both mechanics as well as products. But I think he's phenomenal, and I direct people often to his writing.
He has very good writing skills. He has a lot of stuff to look at, definitely very prolific as well. So any of the books by Carl Kapp as well, if you want to look into Carl in general, Carl, as you know, has been a guest on the podcast, and you can look into that as well, engagers, if that is something that has piqued your curiosity. And Stephen, what would you say is your superpower, that sweet spot, that thing that you do at least better than most other people in this world of educational games and gamification and education and training?
So I would say that, personally, I am focused on storytelling. I think that is something that everyone can relate to on one level or another. And I think it's so critical of a skill to bring people into content. So that is what I'm focused on as leading creative at my company, and thinking about whether it is a deep simulation or it's a simple Twitch game. At the end of the day, it has to have some sort of story that you can connect to. And the reality is that as a marketer or as a trainer, the more that you can build a connection and a level of intellectual curiosity with the audience, the more that you're going to bring them in and keep them for a while with you and your brand, your message, or your training material.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. And talking about all these recommendations that we've gone through, here comes one of the difficult questions of Professor Game. What would you say is your favorite game, Stephen?
I am a simple game guy. So I, for good, bad, or ugly, am constantly playing Angry Birds. And I've been playing Angry Birds now for 7-8 years. I think they've done a good job of taking a very simple mechanic, building in new twists to it, ongoing. And the irony is that there's not a really deep story behind Angry Birds. So it kind of goes against everything I just said, but that's my favorite game and my go-to.
That makes a lot of sense. That is a beautiful game. Many people enjoy it. It's been an example for many people as well. And now that we're here and we still have some time left, Stephen, we'd like to make you a random question coming from the audience, and let's, pick it randomly here, and here it comes. All right. So what would you say is the most common mistake that you have seen when applying gamification in educational settings? So basically, what are the mistakes you see more often, especially done by other people, of course? It's easier to observe them from the outside.
Sure. And I'm sure I'm guilty of this at some point in my career as well. But the one I talk about all the time is chocolate covered broccoli, which is, at the end of the day, you can't just call something a game and expect it to be a game, right? So how many times have we seen, people bring quizzes to the forefront and say, this amazing game, all you got to do is answer these 10 questions and we'll see who gets the most points. And you think to yourself, that's not a game, it's a quiz. And there's nothing fun about it. Right. So, when you think about the things that make a game, from points and badges and feedback and leaderboards and storyline and character development, and all those are critical. And it's a pet peeve of mine. So that, without question, that is, and it's an all too common mistake in my opinion, because you're not really pulling the wool over anybody's eyes, right?
Absolutely. And the thing is, it's very important to remember. And the typical mistake, and the one that we talk a lot about in the industry, is, the PBL, the points, badges, and leaderboards. But it's not just about PBLs. It's anything that you do and you say, well, games have this, let me just add this. That is definitely not the answer when you're doing, because in the end, this is the design discipline, right? You're designing something for a certain objective, for a certain audience. So basically, the main recommendation to avoid that mistake is think about what it is you want to achieve. Think about who you want to achieve it with. And there is where you will come up with the game mechanics, or even the solution that might not even have anything to do with gamification. That is the first invitation that I would say is very, very important. And as you were saying, don't try to just say, gamification, slap a game mechanic here, so now we've done it and we've done it right. Doing it well is a very different thing, and it is possible, and you can do it, and you see very successful examples as the ones that Stephen was talking about. So, Stephen, we're running to the end of our questions. Is there any sort of final piece of advice you want to leave the engagers with?
Well, I would just say that games are such a powerful tool, and whether you're using games for marketing purposes or training purposes, education purposes, there's so much you can tap into, but it really takes some stopping and thinking about how to apply games most effectively to really communicate your message and how to engage that audience. I'll tell you just about one thing that we recently announced, which I'm super excited about. We've been working with a new organization called Games for Good. It's here in the US. And the focus of this organization is taking existing AAA titles and trying to build out mods that really speak to particular topics. So what we're trying to do here is sit at the intersection of well-known games, really important topics, and that could be anywhere from female empowerment to hunger to social injustice, and trying to get companies who have social good dollars and want to really get behind important causes underwrite those mods. And the reason I'm excited about this is, once again, of course, it comes back to my focus of the day, which is storytelling. But it also comes to tapping into an existing audience. And so I'm really excited about this because I think that we've come up with a new way of really leveraging a built-in audience, really popular IPs, really important topics, and accessible dollars to tell and change behavior. And so, the reality is, whether you're using games for marketing, whether you're using games for social good, whether you're using games for training, as long as you really think about that story and you think about that audience and you think about the behavior, the sky's the limit. There's so many amazing things you can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Most certainly, there is absolutely no limit in that sense, if you want to see it that way. I completely agree. And this links very well into our next and last question is, where can we find out more about Stephen and about the companies that you've been talking about all these mods and all these things that you've been mentioning recently as well? Where can we find you in the world of the internet?
So my company is called The Game Agency. I'm into very literal names, so thegameagency.com. Our product is called The Training Arcade, thetrainingarcade.com. And if you look at the company that I just mentioned, Games for Good is available. And check that out because gamesforgood.org is where you can find information on this new initiative. All of the above are super exciting. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to email me. My contact information is on all three sites.
Sounds absolutely great. Thank you once again very much for all that experience, for investing this time today with the engagers on Professor Game. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this interview with Stephen. And do you have more questions that you would like to ask future guests, like the one that we made to Stephen today? All you have to do is go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. Once it is selected, it'll come up in a future episode and you will get your answer live in an episode of Professor Game. And of course, before you go into your next mission, I know I say this every single episode, but it is very important for all of us, for the growth of the podcast, to get more engagers like you so we make the world and learning amazing. So remember to subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.